I'm 99 years old, and I will tell you something most people do not expect to hear from a man who has lived this long. Chronic disease is not a destiny written in your bones. It is often a slow story written in your habits. I have watched friends surrender to illness as if it were a storm sent by fate, while others quietly stepped away from the same dangers simply by changing the way they lived each day. Longevity, I have learned, is rarely a miracle. It is usually a pattern. When I was young, people spoke about aging as if it were a downhill road you could not escape. They believed that stiff joints, failing hearts, clouded minds, and tired bodies were the unavoidable tolls of growing older. Doctors were respected, medicines were trusted, and suffering was accepted as natural. But life itself became my greatest teacher. I began to notice that the men who moved their bodies daily seemed to carry less pain. The women who cooked simple, fresh meals seemed to carry more energy. Those who laughed easily and slept deeply seemed to withstand storms that crushed others. At first I thought these were coincidences. Over the decades I realized they were biological consequences. The human body is not merely a machine that breaks with time. It is an adaptive organism that responds continuously to signals. Every meal, every walk, every hour of sleep, every moment of stress is a message sent into the bloodstream, into the nervous system, into the silent chemistry of cells. Health is not a single decision. It is an accumulation of decisions so small they often go unnoticed, until the results become impossible to ignore. I am not saying that genetics do not matter. I buried a brother who inherited a fragile heart, and I comforted a friend whose illness came like lightning without warning. Life will always contain uncertainty. Yet even within uncertainty, there is remarkable room for influence. I have seen men strengthen weak lungs by quitting smoke before it was too late. I have seen women reverse rising blood sugar by walking faithfully every morning. I have seen grief break a body and purpose rebuild it again. The greatest misunderstanding about chronic disease is that it appears suddenly. In truth, it usually grows quietly, like moss on stone. Years of excess sugar, years of sitting still, years of carrying tension in the chest and resentment in the mind. These are not dramatic events. They are ordinary routines. But biology remembers what we repeat. The heart remembers. The arteries remember. The immune system remembers. By the time most people notice symptoms, the process has already been unfolding for decades. This is why prevention is not a slogan to me. It is a strategy for survival. It is the art of shaping tomorrow's body with today's choices. I stand here, nearly a century into this life, not because I defeated time, but because I learned to cooperate with the quiet laws that govern how a body heals, adapts, and endures. What took me many decades to understand can be said very simply. The body is always listening. It listens to what you eat, how you move, how you breathe, how you think, and even how you hope. At 99, I feel this truth in my bones more clearly than I ever did in youth. When I was 40, I believed strength meant endurance. Working long hours, ignoring fatigue, eating whatever filled the stomach fastest. I mistook survival for health. Many of us did. We were proud of pushing through pain, as if resilience meant silencing the body's warnings. Only later did I realize that real resilience is not about overriding biology. It is about cooperating with it. Chronic disease does not begin with a dramatic collapse. It begins with subtle imbalances. A man eats refined sugar daily for years. His blood glucose rises slightly, then falls, then rises again. His pancreas compensates faithfully, producing more insulin to restore balance. For a long time, he feels nothing unusual. Yet inside him, microscopic changes are unfolding. Cells gradually become less responsive to insulin. Fat begins to accumulate in places where it interferes with metabolism. Inflammation, almost invisible, becomes a background condition. Eventually, what once required only minor correction becomes a persistent disorder. When the diagnosis finally comes, people call it sudden, but biology never works suddenly. It works patiently. I witnessed this pattern in a dear friend named Samuel. We met when we were both young apprentices in a mechanical workshop. Samuel was brilliant with his hands and generous with his laughter, but he believed food was merely fuel, and the cheapest fuel would do. Over decades, he developed a habit of eating quickly, rarely moving, and sleeping too little. In his 60s, he was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. At first, he saw it as an unavoidable punishment of age, but after a difficult year, he began walking each morning, replacing heavy processed meals with simple whole foods, and learning to rest without guilt. Within 2 years, his energy returned in ways that surprised even his physicians. He did not become a different person. He became a more attentive one. The heart follows similar principles. The cardiovascular system is a living network that remodels itself continuously. When we remain sedentary, the heart becomes less efficient, the vessels less elastic, the circulation less responsive. Blood pressure creeps upward, often without pain. Yet when movement becomes routine, not extreme exertion, but consistent, moderate activity, the heart strengthens like a muscle rediscovering its purpose. I learned this lesson in my 70s. After a minor health scare, I began walking every evening at sunset. At first, it was uncomfortable. My joints protested, my breath shortened. But within months, I felt a quiet transformation. Sleep deepened, thoughts cleared, even my mood softened. Movement was not merely exercise. It was communication between intention and physiology. Stress, too, writes its signature on the body. Many people imagine stress as an emotional experience only, but it is profoundly chemical. Chronic tension elevates hormones that prepare the body for danger, useful in brief emergencies, harmful when sustained for years. These hormones increase heart rate, raise blood pressure, alter immune function, and disrupt digestion. I have seen men who were physically strong crumble under the invisible burden of constant worry. Conversely, I have seen frail individuals regain vitality simply by cultivating moments of calm through prayer, meditation, gardening, or quiet conversation. There was a period in my life when financial hardship threatened everything I had built. I carried anxiety like a stone in my chest. During that time, I developed persistent digestive problems and frequent headaches. No medicine seemed to solve the issue completely. What changed me was not a new prescription, but a new rhythm. I began rising earlier to sit in silence before the day's demands began. I learned to breathe slowly and deliberately. Over time, my symptoms eased. The body, when given signals of safety, often begins to repair itself. Sleep is another underestimated architect of health. In youth, we treat sleep as optional, even inconvenient. Yet deep, restorative sleep is when the brain consolidates memory, when tissues repair microscopic damage, when hormonal systems recalibrate. Chronic sleep deprivation, repeated over years, can accelerate metabolic dysfunction, impair immune defense, and cloud cognitive clarity. I did not fully respect sleep until my late 50s. Once I established a consistent routine, retiring earlier, reducing late-night stimulation, embracing darkness and quiet, I noticed that my resilience to illness improved significantly. Nutrition, movement, stress regulation, and sleep are not isolated pillars. They are interdependent processes. A poor diet can disturb sleep. Chronic stress can lead to overeating. Lack of movement can increase anxiety. Conversely, a single positive change often creates a cascade of improvements. When you begin walking regularly, appetite becomes more balanced. When you sleep well, emotional stability increases. When you eat nourishing food, energy for movement returns. Health is not built through heroic effort, it is built through harmonious cycles. Another truth I have learned is that mindset influences physiology more deeply than many realize. Belief shapes behavior, and behavior shapes biology. If a person believes illness is inevitable, they may unconsciously abandon preventive actions. They may ignore early warning signs or rationalize harmful habits. But when a person adopts the conviction that their choices matter, even small improvements become meaningful. Hope, in this sense, is not naive optimism. It is a catalyst for practical change. In my 90s, I continue to adapt. I no longer walk as quickly as I once did, but I walk consistently. I eat smaller portions, but I choose foods that sustain rather than burden. I allow myself moments of rest without feeling unproductive. I maintain social connections because loneliness, I have observed, can be as damaging as poor nutrition. These adjustments are not sacrifices. They are investments in functional independence. Perhaps the most important lesson I can offer is this: prevention is not about perfection. It is about direction. You do not need to transform your life overnight. You need to align daily actions gradually with the biological reality that the body thrives on balance. Chronic diseases often emerge from long-standing imbalance. Therefore, long-standing balance can become a powerful protective force. I have lived long enough to see medical science evolve in extraordinary ways. Treatments have improved, technologies have advanced, and many lives have been saved. Yet the fundamental principle remains unchanged. The human organism possesses remarkable self-regulatory capacity. When we reduce harmful inputs and increase supportive behaviors, we create conditions in which healing processes can operate more effectively. Medicine can assist, but lifestyle often determines the terrain upon which medicine must work. As I reflect on nearly a century of observation, I do not see aging as a simple decline. I see it as a negotiation. Each decade presents new challenges, but also new opportunities to refine habits. The body does not demand youth to remain functional. It demands respect for its rhythms. Chronic disease is not always avoidable, but it is often postponable, reducible, or manageable through choices made long before symptoms arise. If you listen carefully, your body is already telling you what it needs. The question is not whether the message exists. The question is whether you are willing to hear it and to respond with patience, consistency, and quiet determination. As the years gathered behind me like long shadows at sunset, I began to notice a deeper layer of truth about chronic disease, one that goes beyond diet charts or exercise routines. It is the truth that the body is not only mechanical, but ecological. Inside each of us exists a living environment, a dynamic landscape shaped by what we repeatedly expose it to. Just as a forest responds to climate, water, and human influence, our internal systems respond to nutrients, toxins, activity, and emotional climate. When this internal environment becomes chronically inflamed, depleted, or overstimulated, disease finds fertile ground. When it is balanced and nourished, resilience quietly takes root. Inflammation is a word that doctors use often, yet few people truly understand its slow, cumulative power. Acute inflammation is protective. It helps us heal from injury and fight infection. But chronic low-grade inflammation, the kind fueled by years of poor nutrition, sedentary living, unresolved stress, and environmental exposures, acts like a constant whisper of distress throughout the body. It alters blood vessels, disrupts metabolic signaling, accelerates cellular aging, and burdens the immune system. I have watched men in their 50s move like they were already old because their internal systems had been fighting silent battles for decades. There was a farmer in my village named Luis who embodied this lesson. He was never wealthy, but he was attentive to rhythms, the rhythms of seasons, of soil, of his own physical limits. He ate food he cultivated with his hands. He rose with the sun and rested when darkness fell. He carried worry, like all of us, but he did not allow it to dominate his mind. When he reached his 80s, his posture was still upright, his handshake still firm. Meanwhile, some of our wealthier neighbors, surrounded by convenience and abundance, struggled with heart disease, obesity, and fatigue. It was not privilege that protected Luis. It was alignment. As I aged, I also became increasingly aware of the immune system's remarkable adaptability. Many people imagine immunity as something fixed, a gift you either possess or lack. In reality, it behaves more like a skill that can be strengthened or weakened. Nutrition provides the raw materials for immune cells to function. Sleep allows immune memory to consolidate. Physical activity enhances circulation, enabling defensive cells to reach vulnerable tissues more efficiently. Even emotional states influence immune responsiveness. Prolonged despair or isolation can suppress protective mechanisms, while social connection and purpose appear to enhance them. In my late 80s, I experienced a severe respiratory infection that frightened my family. Recovery was slow, and for the first time I felt the genuine vulnerability of advanced age. Yet what surprised my physician was not the illness, but the rebound. Because I had spent decades cultivating relatively stable habits, my body retained a degree of physiological reserve. I gradually regained strength through gentle movement, nourishing food, and disciplined rest. That experience taught me that prevention does not guarantee immunity from hardship. Rather, it builds capacity to recover when hardship inevitably arrives. Another aspect of chronic disease that is rarely discussed is the role of metabolic flexibility, the body's ability to adapt to varying energy demands. When a person relies heavily on processed foods and constant caloric excess, metabolic systems become rigid. Blood sugar regulation becomes erratic. Fat storage increases, Energy levels fluctuate unpredictably. Over time, this rigidity contributes to conditions such as diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and cognitive decline. By contrast, when eating patterns are moderate and varied, and when physical activity is regular, the body maintains a more stable internal economy. Energy production becomes efficient rather than chaotic. I learned this lesson indirectly through travel. In my 60s, I spent several months in a mountainous region where daily life required walking long distances, and meals were simple and unprocessed. I noticed that my appetite naturally adjusted. I felt satisfied with less food, yet my stamina improved. Returning to urban life, with its abundance of convenience and excess, I became aware of how easily modern environments can disrupt ancient biological rhythms. Chronic disease, in many cases, is not merely a personal failure. It is also an environmental challenge. To remain healthy, one must consciously design daily routines that counterbalance these influences. The brain, too, ages according to the signals it receives. Cognitive decline is often attributed solely to time, yet mental engagement, emotional stability, and physical health all interact to shape neurological resilience. I have made it a habit to read, to converse, to learn new skills even in advanced age. These practices are not about intellectual pride. They are about preserving neural pathways that support memory, judgment, and clarity. Just as muscles weaken without use, so too does the mind. Perhaps the most profound transformation I have witnessed in people who successfully avoid or delay chronic disease is not physical, but philosophical. They shift from a mindset of short-term gratification to one of long-term stewardship. They begin to see their bodies not as tools to be exploited, but as companions to be cared for. This shift changes daily decisions in subtle but powerful ways. A person who values future vitality may choose to walk rather than drive short distances. They may prepare food at home rather than rely constantly on convenience. They may seek meaningful relationships rather than isolating themselves in stress-driven routines. In my own life, this philosophical shift occurred gradually. In youth, I believed health was a resource that would replenish automatically. In maturity, I understood it required maintenance. In old age, I came to see it as a form of gratitude expressed through responsible living. Each morning that I awaken with enough strength to stand, breathe deeply, and step into the light feels like confirmation that small, consistent actions accumulate into profound outcomes. Chronic disease is often described as an enemy to be fought. I now see it more as a signal to be interpreted. It tells us where imbalance has persisted too long. It invites correction, adaptation, and sometimes humility. When individuals respond early, they can alter the trajectory of decline. When they respond late, improvement may still be possible, though more difficult. The key is awareness combined with persistence. As I approach the threshold of a century, I am not free from discomfort or limitation. Aging carries its own realities, yet I remain convinced that the narrative of inevitable deterioration is incomplete. Biology is not entirely predetermined. It is participatory. We co-author our physical futures through repeated choices that either support or undermine the body's inherent intelligence. If there is wisdom in my long journey, it is this: vitality is rarely the result of a single heroic act. It is the quiet consequence of ordinary decisions practiced faithfully over extraordinary spans of time. Now, as I stand at the far edge of a long and winding life, I see health with a clarity that only time can grant. I no longer measure vitality by the absence of wrinkles or the speed of my stride. I measure it by my ability to wake with purpose, to breathe without fear, to feel the quiet cooperation of organs that have served me faithfully for nearly a century. Chronic disease has taken many people I loved. It has humbled families, altered destinies, and rewritten dreams. Yet even in its shadow, I have witnessed something profoundly hopeful: the undeniable influence of human choice. We cannot command the body to remain forever young. We cannot eliminate every risk or predict every outcome, but we can shape the terrain upon which illness either flourishes or struggles to survive. This is the true meaning of saying disease is not inevitable. It does not mean life will always be gentle. It means we are not powerless participants in our own decline. We are architects, whether we realize it or not, of the conditions that determine how gracefully we age. Looking back, I understand that prevention was never about fear. It was about respect. Respect for biological rhythms, for the intelligence of cells, for the delicate balance that sustains life. Each nourishing meal was a quiet vote for the future. Each walk under an open sky was a small act of repair. Each night of deep sleep was a silent negotiation with time itself. These actions seemed insignificant when viewed in isolation, yet over decades they accumulated like steady drops filling a vast reservoir of resilience. I have also learned that change is rarely dramatic at the beginning. A person who decides to live differently may not see immediate transformation. The body often requires patience before revealing the rewards of new habits, but persistence creates momentum. Momentum creates adaptation. Adaptation creates protection. Eventually, what once felt like discipline becomes identity. Health becomes not something you chase, but something you embody. If you are listening to the voice of an old man today, do not wait for the urgency of illness to awaken your attention. Listen while your strength is still abundant. Listen while your choices are still flexible. The earlier you align your daily life with the principles of balance and moderation, the more gently the years will treat you. Yet even if you begin late, begin anyway. Biology retains a surprising capacity for recovery when given the chance. I do not claim to possess secret formulas or miraculous insights. My wisdom is simple, earned through observation, loss, and gratitude. Move your body as if it were designed for movement, because it was. Feed it as if it were a living system, because it is. Calm your mind as if peace were medicinal, because it often is. And above all, believe that your actions matter. Belief is the seed from which all sustainable change grows. One day, you too will look back across the decades of your life. You will ask yourself whether you lived passively, surrendering to habits that weakened you, or consciously, shaping patterns that strengthened you. My hope is that you will choose the latter. Not perfectly, not rigidly, but consistently enough that your future self can stand with dignity, breathing the quiet satisfaction of a body that was cared for rather than neglected. At 99, I have come to see longevity not as a conquest, but as a conversation, a lifelong dialogue between intention and biology. Chronic disease may be common, But inevitability is a story we tell ourselves when we forget the power of daily choice. Remember this, and you may discover, as I did, that the path toward a healthier old age begins not in some distant future, but in the next small decision you make today.